The African wilderness is a place of beauty and danger where every sunrise carries stories untold. To the rangers who dedicate their lives here, each day is a battle against time, protecting wildlife from poachers, storms, disease, and the silent cruelties of the wild. Ranger Daniel was one of the most respected men in the reserve, known for his courage and his ability to read the language of animals. But on this particular morning, as the golden light spilled across the savannah and the air was filled with the earthy scent of dew-soaked grass, something unusual broke the rhythm of nature. It wasn't the distant roar of lions or the shrill cry of vultures. It was a cry unlike anything Daniel had heard before, piercing, mournful, and strangely human. The sound stopped him in his tracks. He turned his head, scanning the area, heart thundering in his chest. And then he saw it, a baby gorilla, trembling on the wooden deck near the ranger station, its eyes wet with tears, reaching out toward him with desperate little hands. In that moment, Daniel's life shifted. He knew that this was not just a random encounter. This was a plea, a call for help. And answering it would take him into a story that would change everything. At first glance, Daniel thought the little one might have wandered too far from its troop, frightened and lost. But as he approached, he noticed the way its small body shook with sobs, the way it reached out as though begging to be understood. Its eyes locked on his, not with fear, but with trust, raw, vulnerable trust that pierced through his heart. Slowly, carefully, he knelt down, extending his hand. For a brief second, time seemed to stop. Would the gorilla run? Would it shy away? But then, with trembling fingers, the baby clasped his hand. The grip was surprisingly firm, almost human, filled with urgency. Daniel felt the tiny fingers curl tightly around his own, and in that simple gesture, he understood. This was not an accident. The gorilla had come to him for a reason. Before Daniel could react further, the baby tugged at his hand and let out a sharp cry, pointing its other arm toward the dense forest beyond the cabins. The urgency in its eyes was unmistakable. Something or someone was out there, something the gorilla desperately needed him to see. Daniel hesitated only for a moment, then whispered, "All right, take me." And with that, he allowed himself to be led away from the safety of the station into the unknown shadows of the jungle. The further they went, the more Daniel felt the forest closing in around them. At first, the sounds of nature followed, the chatter of birds, the rustle of leaves stirred by monkeys, the distant cry of a hornbill. But as they moved deeper, an eerie silence fell. The jungle, usually alive with movement and voices, had grown unnaturally quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause. Daniel's instincts prickled. Silence in the wild was often the greatest warning of all. He tightened his grip on the radio strapped to his belt, but when he tried calling for backup, only static answered. He was on his own. The baby gorilla tugged impatiently, looking over its shoulder with pleading eyes as though begging him to move faster. Daniel's boots pressed softly against the soil, his senses heightened. He began noticing details that made his stomach tighten. Branches snapped unnaturally, as if something heavy had crashed through. Patches of grass pressed flat in odd shapes. Claw marks scratched deeply into tree bark. Every sign spoke of struggle, of intrusion. The silence grew heavier, pressing against his ears. He realized this was no ordinary patrol. The forest was holding its breath because danger had already passed through and perhaps still lingered ahead. Yet the gorilla kept pulling him forward, leading him with unwavering determination, as though it knew exactly where it wanted him to go. When they reached a small clearing, Daniel crouched low, scanning the ground. His heart lurched. Footprints, human ones, pressed fresh into the soil, sharp and undeniable. He ran his fingers across the indentations, recognizing the telltale signs. Boots, not bare feet. He followed the trail with his eyes and noticed the drag marks stretching into the distance, as though something had been pulled. Something heavy, He swallowed hard, bile rising in his throat. He had seen this before. Poachers. His mind raced with possibilities. Could they have taken one of the gorillas? Were they setting traps deeper in the reserve? The thought sent a chill down his spine. He looked up at the baby clinging to his arm, its breath shallow and quick, eyes darting nervously into the trees. It whimpered, pointing ahead with a shaky hand. Daniel clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of urgency settle in his chest. He knew what had to be done. Backup wasn't an option. If the poachers were still nearby, every second mattered. With quiet determination, he rose to his feet, adjusted his belt and whispered, "Let's find them." The baby gorilla whimpered once more, then began leading him further into the shadows. The smell of rust hit Daniel before he saw it, a metallic stench mixed with the faint, unmistakable scent of blood. His eyes narrowed as he spotted the cruel glint of steel hidden under a patch of leaves. It was a snare, coiled like a predator waiting in silence. His breath caught when he noticed tufts of dark fur caught between the jagged teeth of the trap. His heart sank. Slowly, he followed the trail, his boots crunching on disturbed soil. Then his eyes fell on a sight that made his stomach twist. There, half hidden beneath the brush, lay a gorilla, an adult female, massive and powerful, even in her weakened state. But she was not free. The cruel steel of another snare was clamped around her leg, cutting deep into flesh, blood soaking the ground beneath her. She was weak, breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling with painful effort. And yet her eyes, those deep, fierce eyes, still glowed with defiance. She had not given up, not even as she bled. The baby beside Daniel let out a heart-wrenching cry, pulling at his arm, desperate for him to act. Daniel's throat tightened. He realized in horror that this was the baby's mother. Daniel's breath hitched as he took in the sight of the mother gorilla. Her massive frame should have been a symbol of strength, yet now she was reduced to trembling gasps of pain. Her fur was matted with dirt and blood, her leg caught cruelly in the snare, the steel biting deep into her flesh. She growled low, a sound that was both a warning and a cry for help. The baby gorilla at Daniel's side sobbed louder, pulling at him with desperation, as if saying, "Please, save her." Daniel's training had prepared him for many things, but nothing could prepare him for the raw anguish of this moment. He knew approaching too fast could provoke the mother, even in her weakened state. Slowly, he crouched, lowering himself to her level, speaking softly in a voice he used with frightened animals. "Easy now. I'm here to help." Her eyes locked on him, fierce, protective, but wavering with exhaustion. She made no move to attack, only clutched at the ground with her massive fists, as if bracing herself against the pain. Daniel scanned the trap. It was heavy, reinforced, designed by poachers who knew the strength of gorillas. He would need tools, time, and steady hands. Time, however, was something he did not have. The baby pressed itself against his leg, whimpering as though urging him to hurry. In that moment, Daniel made a silent vow. He would not leave this mother to die in chains of iron. Daniel dug into his kit, pulling out what tools he carried, pliers, a rope, a small emergency saw. None of them were meant for this level of brutality, but he had no choice. The mother gorilla let out another low growl as he moved closer, her instincts battling between fear and trust. The baby whimpered, stepping between them, placing one tiny hand on its mother's chest and the other reaching toward Daniel, as if bridging the gap of trust between man and beast. Daniel took a deep breath, then leaned forward, gripping the cold metal trap. It was clamped tight, cutting deeper with every movement she made. His fingers ached as he tried to force it open, his muscles straining. The forest around them felt heavier with every passing second. Time dragged, every heartbeat pounding in his ears. He imagined predators lurking just beyond the tree line, drawn by the scent of blood. He imagined poachers returning, armed and merciless. Sweat trickled down his face as he worked, muttering under his breath, "Come on, come on." Finally, with a sharp crack, part of the trap loosened. The mother roared in pain but did not strike him, almost as if she knew he was fighting for her freedom. He tightened his grip, pulling again, his arms trembling. He was close, but not close enough. One wrong move and she would bleed out. The race against time was no longer about minutes. It was about seconds. No longer about minutes. It was about seconds. A sudden snap of a twig behind him froze Daniel in place. He turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. The silence was broken not by animals, but by the low murmur of human voices. Poachers, they were coming back. His blood ran cold. He was kneeling beside a wounded gorilla, unarmed except for a tranquilizer he hadn't loaded, and now the hunters were closing in. The baby gorilla whimpered softly, pressing itself against his side, its body trembling in fear. The mother, though weak, let out a guttural warning growl that rumbled through the clearing. Daniel's heart pounded. He couldn't leave. He couldn't abandon them. He crouched lower, forcing his breathing to steady, listening carefully. The footsteps grew louder, the crunch of boots on dry leaves unmistakable. He could make out two voices speaking in low tones, carrying the casual cruelty of men who had done this many times before. His eyes darted around, searching for cover, searching for any advantage. He spotted a large fallen branch, heavy enough to serve as a weapon, just within reach. Slowly, he shifted his hand toward it, praying the poachers wouldn't notice him before he had a plan. The baby looked up at him with wide, fearful eyes. In that moment, Daniel realized the fight was no longer just for the gorillas. It was for his own survival, too. The poachers stepped into the clearing, rifles slung carelessly over their shoulders, their eyes scanning the trap. One of them cursed under his breath when he saw the loosened metal, realizing someone had tampered with it. Daniel pressed his body low to the ground, hidden partially by brush. He felt the baby gorilla clinging to him, its tiny heartbeat racing against his arm. His mind raced. He could attack, but 2 against 1 was suicide. He could run, but that meant leaving the gorillas behind. No, he had to be smarter. He waited, muscles coiled, listening to their every movement. The men stepped closer, bending over the wounded mother. One raised his rifle slightly, muttering something about finishing the job. That was the moment Daniel acted. With a roar that startled even himself, he burst from the brush, swinging the heavy branch with all his strength. The first poacher crumpled to the ground, stunned by the blow. The second staggered back, fumbling with his rifle, but Daniel was faster. He lunged, tackling him to the ground, their bodies crashing against the dirt. They struggled fiercely, fists flying, the rifle skittering out of reach. The mother gorilla, as if sensing the threat, let out a thunderous roar that echoed across the forest. The poacher froze in terror, his courage faltering under the raw power of the sound. Daniel seized the moment, pinning him down. With the poachers subdued, Daniel finally grabbed the rifle and flung it far into the trees. His chest heaved, his muscles burned, but his spirit did not waver. He had chosen to fight, and for now the wild had chosen to fight with him. The clearing was quiet again, except for the heavy breathing of Daniel and the wounded gorilla. The poachers had fled into the forest, their courage shattered. Daniel dropped the broken branch and returned to the mother, his hands trembling but determined. She watched him with tired, pained eyes, yet made no move to resist. Gently, carefully, he pried the last of the snare open. With a final snap, the cruel metal gave way, releasing her leg. The mother let out a low moan, collapsing against the ground. Blood stained the earth, but she was free. The baby gorilla cried out and rushed to her side, pressing its tiny body against her, clinging to her fur with shaking arms. Daniel sat back, chest heaving, overwhelmed by the moment. And something extraordinary happened. The mother gorilla, despite her pain, turned her gaze toward him. For a long heartbeat, their eyes met. Man and beast, predator and protector, bound by something deeper than words. She did not roar, did not charge. Instead, she lowered her head slightly a gesture that Daniel felt in his soul, a gesture of recognition, of trust. And then, as the baby nestled against her, she reached one massive arm around it, pulling it close, never breaking her gaze with Daniel. In that silent exchange, he knew he had been accepted, not as an enemy, not even as a savior, but as part of their story. When backup finally arrived, Daniel led them to the clearing. What they found left everyone speechless. Around the trap site were not just the signs of one captured gorilla, but multiple snare lines stretching into the forest. The poachers had planned a large-scale capture, enough to devastate the troop and sell the survivors into trafficking. If the baby had not come for help, if Daniel had not followed, the entire family might have been lost forever. Rangers worked quickly to dismantle the snares, but all Daniel could see was the baby, now curled safely against its mother. His heart swelled with relief and pride. He realized then that the unthinkable was not just the cruelty of men, it was also the miracle of trust. A wild animal, a baby, had crossed the invisible line between its world and his, had sought him out, and in doing so, had saved them all. The little gorilla had not just begged for its mother, it had begged for its entire family. And in that plea, it had reminded Daniel of something greater than duty. It had reminded him of the power of compassion. In the wilderness, survival is often thought of as strength versus weakness, predator versus prey. But sometimes, survival depends on something far greater: trust. The baby gorilla's tears carried more weight than any weapon, more urgency than any command. They bridged the gap between species, proving that even in silence, cries of innocence can call forth courage. Daniel learned that true guardianship is not about power, but about listening. Listening to the smallest voices, the ones most easily ignored. Because sometimes those voices carry the warnings that save lives. And in the end, it was not the ranger who saved the gorillas. It was the gorilla child who saved them all. The child who saved them all.